Private First Class Danny Reyes did not intend to start a war. She also did not intend to accidentally call Supreme Fleet Commander Vorkith Alshuran of the Keth Dominion, winner of 47 documented battles, destroyer of 2 star systems, and the being the Galactic Intelligence Bureau officially classified as a threat event, not a person, my love. But she did. And then everything got extremely complicated. It started the way bad days usually started for Danny Reyes, with a comms failure, a missing superior officer, and 3 seconds to make a decision that nobody had actually trained her to make. The 9th Expeditionary Battalion had been deployed to Outpost Myra 7 for what command called a low-priority diplomatic observation post. What that actually meant was 17 humans crammed into a prefabricated garrison on a moon that smelled like burnt copper, 40 light minutes from the nearest Allied vessel, tasked with monitoring ion traffic through the Caldera corridor, while their actual diplomats handled the real work on the Keth flagship 12,000 kilometers overhead. The posting was, by any reasonable military metric, a nothing assignment. Sergeant Holt called it the galaxy's most expensive parking job. He said it without bitterness. He'd been in service long enough to understand that most of what the military did was wait, in uncomfortable places, for something important to happen somewhere else, and to look alert while doing it. Danny had been in service for 11 months. She'd qualified on standard-issue pulse rifles, basic exosuit operation, and rudimentary xenolinguistic protocols, enough to say please and stop, and I come in peace in 43 alien languages, not enough to conduct anything that could be called diplomacy. She was not a diplomat. She was barely even a soldier yet, according to Sergeant Holt, who said it at least once per duty shift with a particular tone that indicated he was telling her something she needed to hear rather than something designed to diminish her. She didn't take it personally. She knew what she was. She'd enlisted at 22, 6 weeks after her brother's medical bills had made the signing bonus feel less like a career choice and more like simple arithmetic. She'd shown up to training with decent fitness and better reflexes, and a quality her instructors variously called resilience and steadiness, and less charitably, an inexplicable absence of self-preservation instinct. The instructors who said the second thing weren't entirely wrong. Danny had a way of encountering danger and experiencing not the sharp spike of animal fear, but a kind of focusing. The world reducing, getting smaller and cleaner. The problem in front of her becoming very clear and everything behind it becoming very quiet. She'd done it the first time at 14, when her younger brother fell into the reservoir at the edge of town, and she jumped in after him without thinking, without registering fear as a step in the process, just looked at the situation and moved. Her mother had been there. Her mother's voice afterward, "You were supposed to be scared," had been the first time Danny understood that she processed danger differently from most people. It was useful in the military. It was less useful in situations that required fear as input data, where the appropriate response to a threatening stimulus was retreat rather than engagement. Her instructors had noted this in her assessment file in language that could be read as a strength or a liability, depending on circumstances. On Myra 7, at 3:40 station time, it turned out to be the thing that kept the garrison from becoming rubble. The morning, or what the outpost's clock called morning, since Myra 7's rotation was 31 hours and the local sun was a distant smear in the haze, started with a sound none of them had ever heard before. Not an alarm exactly. Deeper than that. A sub-bass resonance that vibrated through the garrison walls, through the floor plating, through Danny's back molars. The kind of sound that made your nervous system file a complaint before your brain had finished identifying the source. She was already at her station when Private Callas burst through the inner door with the face of someone who had just processed very bad news and had not yet finished processing it. 3 Keth warships dropped out of jump transit directly above us, Callas said. Command's comms are dark, jamming field covers the whole local band. Lieutenant Osai went to restore the secondary relay 40 minutes ago, and we haven't heard from him. Sergeant Holt is. I know where the sergeant is. She did not elaborate. Holt had come down with something the medic was calling Myra fever and was currently horizontal in the med bay, his temperature 2 degrees above normal, murmuring about his mother's garden. Not dying, just entirely useless for the next 18 hours, which, given the current situation, amounted to the same thing. Who else is on deck? Yumi, Privates Yun and Marcy. The rest are on perimeter survey. Their comms are dark too. Danny looked at the tactical display. 3 Keth warships. She knew enough about Keth military hardware to know what 3 warships could do to a prefabricated garrison on a copper moon if they felt like it. The answer was, quickly and thoroughly, and in a way that would require no follow-up. Why haven't they fired? She asked. They're hailing us. Signal's been running for 4 minutes. She pulled up the frequency. The Keth Dominion sigil was cycling the double helix wrapped in a sunburst, and below it the hailing pattern repeated in a measured rhythm. Not aggressive, not a weapons lock. A contact request, patient and deliberate, the signal of someone who intended to be answered. They wanted to talk. Can you patch this through to command? She asked, already knowing the answer. Jamming field covers everything. We're alone. She took a breath that was not quite a sigh and not quite a brace and was, she thought about it later, the sound of a decision making itself. Put them through, she said. The screen opened. What filled it was not what Danny had been briefed to expect from standard Keth military communications. The officer on the screen was not behind a ceremonial desk or seated at a command console flanked by protocol staff. She was standing directly, alone in the channel frame, in the center of what was clearly a warship's command deck, and she was wearing full battle armor. The dark-plated Keth warshell that looked like something a deep ocean predator might grow if evolution had a bad day and an excellent aesthetic sense simultaneously. The 4-pointed rank insignia on her collar was flagged in Danny's briefing materials in bright red. Fleet Commander, not a garrison officer, not a regional adjutant. A fleet commander, which in the Keth military hierarchy was 3 levels above anything Danny had been briefed to expect at a routine observation outpost. The being on screen had the angular, elongated facial structure of high-caste Keth. She was 6 inches taller than any human Danny had stood next to. Bioluminescent lines ran along her jaw and the ridges of her temples, pulsing in a deep, angry amber, the color of a fire that had been burning long enough to be patient about it. Eyes the color of a cold star, pale and precise. A scar ran from her left temple to the ridge of her mandible, old and long-heeled, and somehow completely natural on a face that had been engineered by the specific pressures of command and battle into something that communicated authority the way a mountain communicated elevation. Not a choice, just a fact of structure. The rank insignia on her chest was not just Fleet Commander. It was the Vor sigil, the singular prefix in Keth honorifics that the Bureau rendered approximately as unconquerable. Danny's mouth went dry. She thought stall. Find 12 words that buy time, procedural language, standard diplomatic holding phrase. Her mouth had a different plan. "Hello, my love," she said. The silence on the other end of the channel lasted for approximately 3 full seconds. In a military communication with a hostile fleet overhead, 3 seconds is a geological age. It contains multitudes. Danny's brain replayed her own words, identified the error with horrible precision, traced it back to the xenolinguistic training files she had drilled obsessively on the transport to Myra 7, and arrived at the conclusion that she had, through the specific combination of sleep deprivation, adrenaline, and whatever cruel trick the brain plays when it overprepares for something, retrieved the wrong word at the exact wrong moment from adjacent files. The formal greeting for a superior military officer was Vor Kethala, I acknowledge your authority and approach in peace. She had drilled it until it was automatic. She had also drilled Vorkethalanax, the intimate address in the same sessions, to understand what it meant and when never to use it, and under pressure, the brain had handed her the wrong one. Alanax, the one I would not survive without, the one who is my anchor in chaos. The address reserved for bonded partners, for those whose lives were so entwined that the language itself had to name the entanglement. My love. She had called the galaxy's most tactically aggressive fleet commander my love, on an open military channel, with 3 warships overhead. What Danny did next was what she always did when terrified. She kept talking. The theory was unproven and possibly suicidal, but felt more true than any alternative. The universe rewarded forward motion. Stopping was the thing that killed you, not the danger, the freeze. I apologize for the informal address, she said. Her voice was steady. She genuinely did not understand how. We're experiencing a communications disruption across the garrison and our senior officers are temporarily unavailable. I'm the ranking duty officer on station. A single beat, then plainly. Private First Class Daniela Reyes, 9th Expeditionary Battalion, United Earth Defense Forces. I'm here. I want to talk. I'm not going anywhere. What do you need from us? Another silence, shorter than the first. And then Vorketh Alshuran laughed. It was not a warm laugh. Not even recognizably a laugh at first encounter. It was a sharp, percussive exhale, the bioluminescent lines along her jaw flashing yellow-gold in a brief burst before settling back into their angry amber. But it was a laugh. Danny's training was good enough to know that much. A private, the commander said. Her standard was accented but precisely articulated, every consonant placed with the care of someone who had learned the language as a strategic tool rather than a native tongue. They sent a private to answer my channel. They didn't send me exactly, Danny said. I was already here. The commander studied her. Those Cold Star eyes moved across Danny's face with the methodical precision of someone cataloging threats and capabilities. Then they moved past her to the room. The empty stations, the single bank of monitors, the conspicuous absence of senior personnel. Where is your garrison complement? The commander asked. 4 personnel on station. The rest are on perimeter assignment, currently unreachable. Your commanding officer. Sick, Myra fever, not contagious to Keth, different biology entirely. He's not a factor. She kept her voice informational without apology. I'm the most qualified person available to speak with you. I understand that's not saying much. I'm still here. And yet you answered this channel. Someone had to. The commander's head tilted. A Keth gesture the briefing materials flagged as ambiguous, curiosity or contempt, possibly both, possibly something the materials didn't cover. Danny chose curiosity and proceeded accordingly. You are not frightened, the commander said, the edge of a challenge in it, the testing quality of someone deciding how to categorize what they were seeing. I'm incredibly frightened, Danny said, but I'm still talking to you, so I'm not going to let it be the most relevant thing about me right now. The amber pulse shifted, not red, which meant aggression, not yellow, which meant various positive valences, something precisely between an unnamed color that the briefing materials hadn't covered. There is a Keth delegation aboard your diplomatic flagship, Vorketh said. Her tone had shifted toward the transactional. 3 members of House Vel. They were to depart 12 standard hours ago. They have not. We have received no communication explaining the delay and no word from our representatives. I have come personally to determine their status. The word personally carried weight. Fleet commanders sent officers to welfare checks. The fact that Vorketh Alshuran was on this channel herself meant her concern was significant. I'll be transparent with you, Commander, Danny said. I don't have direct visibility on the flagship situation. Our comms are dark across the corridor. I can tell you that our diplomatic team's last logged communication with this garrison was 14 hours ago, and nothing in that communication flagged any difficulty. I don't know what's happened since, but if you'd come here to take action, you would have taken action. You wouldn't have filed a hailing pattern. You ask me a question. People who have already decided don't ask questions. Something moved in those cold star eyes. Not warmth exactly, but attention. The quality of something very dangerous that has decided, for the moment, to look rather than act. What I need, Danny continued, is to restore our relay. If you drop the jamming field or narrow it to exclude the point-to-point channel to the flagship, I can try to raise our diplomatic team directly, get real information, and give you an answer instead of a guess. If I drop the field, you call for reinforcement. I could, Danny agreed. Nearest Allied vessel is 40 light minutes out, 90 minutes minimum at maximum transit. In that time, whatever is happening aboard that flagship happens with or without me knowing about it. Calling for backup doesn't get us an answer faster. She met the commander's eyes. Keep your weapons hot. Keep perimeter. I'm not asking you to lower your guard. I'm asking you to let me try to resolve this in 20 minutes instead of 90. A long silence. The command deck behind Vorkith hummed with organized readiness. Drop the point-to-point band, the commander said to someone off-screen. Then back to Danny. 20 minutes private raise. If I do not have a satisfactory account of House Vel's status, I take direct action. Understood, thank you, Commander. Do not thank me, get me an answer. The channel stayed open. Vorkith stepped back to a secondary console, not watching the screen but listening. The room behind her. Alert lights, officers at stations, the organized precision of a military operation at readiness. All of it present and waiting on the other side of a channel held open by a small and specific act of choosing to hear before acting. Danny turned to Callas. Point to the flagship, every frequency, now. Point to point came up in 4 minutes, routed through the garrison's backup relay that Danny noticed, and filed away, and would note in her incident report, had been quietly working to restore for the entire conversation, because good soldiers who didn't have anyone reporting to them kept working. The signal was degraded and static-heavy but readable. On the other end, a junior aide named Bertrand who sounded like someone operating on the far edge of their training and the near edge of their composure. Is command on the line? We've been trying to raise command for 6 hours. No command, Danny said. Just me. Short version, Bertrand, I have 15 minutes. Short version took 4 of them. The House Vel delegation had been ready to depart on schedule the previous day. Ambassador Castor, 12 years in diplomatic service, had delivered a formal farewell address to the eldest delegate, Vor Vel Sarai. He had used the honorific Velkethnara. He had selected it deliberately, practiced the pronunciation, flagged it in his own briefing materials. It meant recognized equal, technically correct as a respectful farewell between diplomatic counterparts of equivalent standing. What his briefing materials had not contained, a gap that was going to cause genuine professional difficulty for whoever on the Bureau's Xenolinguistic Review Board had approved those materials, was that Velkethnara carried a specific connotation in the context of House Vel negotiations specifically. In other Keth formal contexts, it was clean. In House Vel protocol, it was the address used between 2 parties before a formal contest of worth, a ritual challenge. The equivalent of, I acknowledge you, but you have not yet demonstrated to me whether you are worthy of what we are negotiating. Ambassador Castor had accidentally told the eldest member of House Vel that they hadn't proven themselves yet, and then had watched, genuinely baffled, as the delegation stopped speaking to him entirely, and had spent the following 12 hours trying various approaches to resume communication, each of which had been met with the particular Keth silence reserved for someone who had committed an acknowledged slight and had not yet addressed it. Not rudeness, not anger, just formal protocol. the withholding of engagement that said, "When you understand what you did, we will talk again," and not before. "He doesn't know what he did," Bertrand said. "He's running system diagnostics on the translation software." Danny had her xenolinguistic reference file open before Bertrand finished speaking. She found House Vel formal address in 4 seconds, cross-referenced the slight and the repair protocol, and read for 30 seconds. "I have it," she said. "Find Ambassador Castor now. Get him somewhere he can receive written instruction in the next 3 minutes. Go." She wrote it out while Bertrand walked. The repair address, Velketh Solari. Literally between those who have shared a difficult journey and wish to continue walking. Not an apology. The Keth formal system did not handle apology the way humans did. Apology suggested the slight had not been a choice, and in Keth logic, every action was a choice, even an uninformed one. This was different. An acknowledgement of what had happened, and a declaration that the relationship was more important than the error. Accompanied by the gesture, right hand at the base of the left collarbone, open palm. "I show you where my heart is. I am not hiding it." "Address, then gesture, then wait," she told Bertrand. "Don't speak after the gesture. Let them respond. The gesture has to be sincere. Tell him to mean it." "He'll ask how to mean it." "Tell him to think about something he genuinely regrets," Danny said. "Not necessarily this. Anything real. The gesture works by what you're carrying when you make it, not just the physical form." A pause. She could feel Bertrand's expression through the static. "That is the strangest diplomatic instruction I've ever transmitted," he said. 14 hours of standoff using the standard approach, Danny said. "How's that going?" A brief silence. "Transmitting now," Bertrand said. 7 minutes. The main channel was still open. Vorketh Alshuran was at her secondary console, and Danny had no way to confirm if she could hear the diplomatic channel conversation, but she found herself assuming she could, and finding that assumption easier than the alternative. 6 minutes. Danny watched the chronometer and kept both channels live and thought about nothing except the present problem, because that was the thing, that was always the thing. The reservoir at 14, her brain had not gotten stuck on whether she would be fast enough, whether the water was deep, whether she was scared. It had just moved. The problem was there. She moved toward it. Everything else was noise. 5 minutes. Then Bertrand's voice changed in quality, the particular sound of someone watching something happen that they had not believed would work. "They're speaking," he said. "The delegate, she's using the Solari register. She's responding to the address. They're sir, ma'am, corporal, they're going to the transport deck. The ambassador is walking them out. They're actually boarding." Danny let out a breath she had not been aware of holding. "Good," she said. "Stay on the channel until they've cleared the flagship." "And Bertrand?" "Yes." "Tell Ambassador Castor that his briefing materials are going to need an update." She switched back to the main channel. Vorketh Alshuran was already there, standing at her forward position, watching the screen, waiting for the answer she had given 20 minutes to arrive. "They're boarding the transport now," Danny said. "The delay was a translation nuance in your House Vel formal register that our ambassador was not briefed on. He used an honorific that implied a contest of worth rather than a farewell of equals. The delegation followed proper Keth protocol in withholding engagement until the slight was acknowledged. No harm was intended, and no harm was done. The matter has been resolved." The commander looked at her. "The Velketh Nara address," she said. "Yes." "Before a House Vel negotiation." "Yes." A pause. "Your ambassador has been in diplomatic service for 12 years. "I know," Danny said. "The briefing materials will be updated." On the long-range visual, the transport from the flagship was small and dart-shaped and fast, Keth engineering built for function, crossing 12,000 kilometers in 4 minutes. It docked with the lead warship. The House Vel delegation was aboard. The silence between Danny and the commander now was different from the silence at the beginning. Less armed. Not friendly. There was too much rank differential and too many warships overhead for friendly, but something had changed. The channel felt less like a standoff and more like the end of a shared task. Two people who had been on the same problem from opposite sides and had come out the other side of it. "You are 11 months in service," the commander said. "How do you know that?" "You told me you were private first class. The service time is implicit." A pause. "You sat across from a fleet commander and resolved in 20 minutes what your station's ambassador could not in 12 hours. "I made 2 comms calls and read a reference file," Danny said. "You stayed calm in circumstances designed by circumstance to make calm impossible," the commander said. "That is not a small thing." "I get scared after," Danny said. "Chronologically it happens later. I'll probably be terrified tonight." The bioluminescent lines cycled yellow-gold, slow and full, all the way from jaw to temple, a sustained pulse, the color running warm and unhurried through the amber. In the briefing materials, Danny had only ever seen yellow-gold in diagrams. The annotation said, "Genuine levity, high-status display. Used rarely. Indicates a real response rather than a managed one." The commander's cold star eyes were different in yellow-gold light. Still precise, still methodical, but warmer at the edges. The way stars look different when they're close enough to have color. "Private Rays," Vorkith Alshuran said. "Commander, I will note in the corridor event log that this garrison maintained composure during the transit disruption and facilitated a positive resolution. I will also note that your communications protocols require improvement and that garrison commanding officers should perhaps make better decisions about when to be ill." "I'll pass that along to Sergeant Holt," Danny said, "when he's able to receive information again." "See that you do." The commander's gaze held on her one moment past professional necessity. "Safe passage, Private." "Safe passage, Commander." The screen went dark. Callas made a sound against the wall that contained approximately 7 minutes of held breath. Sergeant Holt, in the med bay, murmured something about tomatoes. Yun was already writing her own report of the relay restoration because she was thorough, which Danny would make sure to mention in the after-action. Danny pulled up the incident report form. Cause of delay, translation error resolved. Personnel involved, Private First Class Daniela Reyes, Fleet Commander Vorkith Alshuran Keth Dominion, cooperative in resolution. She stared at cooperative in resolution for a while. It was accurate. It was also the most inadequate thing she'd put in a form. The form didn't have a field for the unnamed color in those bioluminescent lines, or for the particular quality of those cold star eyes in the moment. The yellow gold had run through them slow and full, or for what it had felt like to be genuinely seen by something that did not look at most things it encountered with any real attention at all. She filed the report, located the coffee substitute, and went back to work. The rest of the duty cycle passed in that particular way that difficult things pass when the adrenaline has burned off, slowly, and with an acute awareness of the body's complaint. Danny's hands shook slightly for about 40 minutes after she filed the report. She noticed them shaking, noted it as physiological rather than emotional, and kept working. By the end of the cycle, she had drafted a full situation summary for when Sergeant Holt was able to receive information, prepped Yun for a second attempt at full relay restoration, and completed a basic xenolinguistic post-incident self-assessment that the training materials recommended after any unexpected alien contact. The self-assessment asked a series of questions about communication quality, protocol adherence, and areas for improvement. Under the field labeled Unexpected Deviations from Standard Procedure, she wrote one line, used Alanax as opening address to a fleet commander. Under Areas for Improvement, she wrote, "See above." She thought about the voice of the commander in Standard, precisely articulated, every consonant placed, and about the way those cold star eyes had moved across her face with that methodical cataloging attention, and about the unnamed color in the bioluminescent lines, the amber gold that the briefing materials had not covered, because the briefing materials had been written by people who had not sat on that side of that channel. She thought, I don't know what that color means. She wrote it in the margins of the xenolinguistic reference file, in the section on Keth bioluminescent communication, unnamed amber gold sustained. Context, apparent throughout conversation, increasing in frequency. No reference in current materials. Recommend further study. She thought, I am definitely going to be terrified tonight. She was terrified that night. It arrived, as she had predicted, chronologically later, a wave of it at 200 when the implications of what 3 warships could have done to the garrison settled into her body in full. She lay in her bunk for 20 minutes with her heart doing something urgent and her hands still, and her brain cycling through the options in a way that sleep had apparently unlocked from the analytical distance she'd maintained during the event. The options were, the situation could have gone differently. The garrison could have been rubble. The wrong word could have been the last word. She lay there until her heart settled. Then she got up, made another coffee substitute, and went back to the xenolinguistic reference files. She stayed there until morning, reading. Private Yun restored full comms by the following afternoon. The first message through was from the Bureau's Xenodiplomacy Division, addressed to the garrison commanding officer, which meant it arrived on Danny's screen because Sergeant Holt was still in the med bay watching the ceiling and murmuring about vegetables. The message said, "We have reviewed the event log and the incident report filed by Private First Class Rays. We are requesting a copy of the full communication transcript, including audio, at your earliest convenience. Please flag for priority xenolinguistic review. Additionally, please note that the fleet commander has entered the following notation in the corridor event log, filed under Keth official record. Garrison personnel demonstrated adherence to contact protocol under non-standard conditions. The individual responsible for channel management displayed communicative competence above recorded rank level. This notation is filed as formal acknowledgement." Danny read it twice. Filed acknowledgement meant something specific in Keth formal record-keeping. She knew this from the supplemental material she had been reading since 200. It meant that Vorkith Alshuran had, in the official record of the Keth Dominion, attached her name, her Vor sigil name, the name that carried the weight of 47 battles and the destruction of 2 fleets, to a statement about a private first class from the 9th Expeditionary Battalion who had answered the wrong channel at the wrong moment, and said the wrong word and then, apparently, done something right enough to merit official acknowledgement. She thought about what right enough had looked like from the inside of it, the coffee substitute at her elbow, the shaking hands that she had not let be visible, the voice saying, "I'm incredibly frightened, but I'm still talking to you," and meaning both parts equally. She thought, I don't know what I did. I know what I didn't do. I didn't stop. She filed the response to Xenodiplomacy, attached the transcript and marked it priority. Under the section for additional notes, she wrote, "Private Yun's restoration of the backup relay array deserves formal recognition." She did not wait to be asked. She kept working. This was essential. She sent it and went to find something to eat and thought about the unnamed color in the bioluminescent lines, until the thought became a question, and the question became a note in the margin, and the note in the margin became the beginning of 12 weeks of study that she had not yet been officially assigned to, but was going to undertake regardless, because that was what she was, and the wall was there, and she had never once found a reason to stop at a wall. The formal debrief arrived 6 days later. Lieutenant Colonel Addisa Farrow, precise and exhausted, with the particular expression of a senior officer required to process something that should not have happened but had produced no damage and possibly produced a benefit, which was the most professionally disorienting category of event in the military. He read the incident report twice, set it on the table. "You called the fleet commander my love," he said. "Inadvertently, yes, sir." Before negotiating the departure of a Keth diplomatic delegation. "I made comms calls, I passed an address." After which House Vel departed peaceably, preventing a Tier 3 diplomatic incident. He looked at her. "Are you aware that Vorkith Alshuran has been directly involved in the destruction of 2 enemy fleets and is classified by the Bureau as a threat event, not a person?" "I found that out after. I didn't know it during." "What did you know during?" She thought about it, about the 3-second silence after the wrong word, about what had moved in those cold star eyes when she'd said, "I'm still talking to you." "I knew something had shifted," she said. "I didn't know what, but I knew the conversation wasn't finished." Pharaoh looked out the viewport for a moment, where Myra 7's haze made a gray-copper smear of the distant sun. "The Xenodiplomacy Division has a theory," he said. "The Alanax address may have triggered what they're calling the bond acknowledgement reflex. In Keth behavioral psychology, someone who uses the Alanax in a crisis is demonstrating, by Keth cultural logic, that they prioritize connection over self-defense. It's not a military response. The theory is that it disarmed her before you said another word." "I disarmed a fleet commander by accident," Danny said. "And then held her disarmed through competence." A pause. "There will be a commendation. The phrasing will be careful about the first part." "Sir, I made a mistake and then I moved fast. That's not commendation material." "It's not for the mistake," Pharaoh said simply. "It's for the moving fast." He stood. "One more thing. The commander filed a Velthari notation in Keth internal records, not the event log, a separate internal register. The Bureau's translation. This one does not stop." He paused with the care of someone about to say something factually accurate but personally unusual. "The notation is typically professional in register. Given the circumstances, the initial address, the channel quality, the specific operational context, the Bureau is not entirely certain it is exclusively professional. You may receive a supplemental xenolinguistic training assignment. Do not argue about it." "I wasn't going to, sir," Danny said. He left without explaining further. She thought he had probably done that on purpose. 3 months later, on the encrypted diplomatic channel established after the Myra 7 incident, a message arrived with the Vor sigil on the header. She read it at evening watch alone. It said, translated as precisely as she was able after 12 weeks of supplemental Keth study. "I have reviewed the corridor incident record. The Xenodiplomacy assessment was accurate but did not record everything. They could not see the quality of attention you brought to the channel. You listened to what I did not say as carefully as what I said. That is rare in diplomatic communication. It is rarer in beings 11 months into their service. The Velthari notation, it does not mean courage. Courage is the performance of unafraid. The Velthari being is not performing anything. The wall appears. The stopping does not occur to them. They look for what is on the other side. You called me Alanax. The word will not be held against you. In the circumstances, 2 beings in a genuine first encounter, both in chaos, no shared map, a gap between languages and frameworks and assumptions. It was not entirely inaccurate. You did not stop at the gap. I find that I am curious about what you will not stop for next. If your service brings you to the corridor again, I expect the correct formal address. Vorkith Alshuran. Fleet Commander, Keth Dominion." She read it twice, then opened the xenolinguistic training files and composed a reply, revised it 4 times, and in the closing honorific, the most significant component of Keth formal correspondence, wrote Velketh Solari. "Between those who have shared a difficult journey and wish to continue walking." She sent it before she could think about it, and went back to her evening watch, and the copper-smelling dark of Myra 7 settled around the garrison like something that had been waiting patiently to be ordinary again. The months between Myra 7 and the reassignment orders were not quiet for Danny's mind, even when they were quiet everywhere else. She went through the supplemental xenolinguistic certification at the pace the Bureau's curriculum set and faster where she could push it. She learned the Keth formal register in full, then the informal registers, then the registers that had no formal name because they were the language that ran between the lines of the others. The pauses, the light shifts, the weight that certain words carried in certain combinations that no briefing material had ever mapped because the people writing the briefing materials had not spent 20 minutes across a channel from someone in whom every communication was layered. She thought about the space between words a lot. She had always been a listener her whole life. Her instructors called it attentiveness. Her mother called it you notice too much. Her brother called it you always knew before I said anything. She had never had a language for it that felt adequate. The Keth formal register, it turned out, was built entirely around the idea that what was not said was as real and as communicable as what was. That a pause was a word. That the amber light shifting was a sentence. That listening well was not a passive act but an active one, the same quality of attention you brought to a weapons qualification or a navigation problem or a channel that had 3 warships overhead and no senior officer available. She passed the certification exam on a Tuesday, Myra 7 time, alone at her station, and sent the completion notice to the Bureau and went to find the coffee substitute, and did not tell anyone because there was nobody at the garrison who would have known what it meant. The message from Vorkith came 2 weeks after the certification. Not on the diplomatic channel, on a separate frequency. The one the Bureau's Xenodiplomacy Division quietly labeled commanders' personal routing in their file annotation, but did not otherwise document. It was 4 lines. Your certification completion was noted. The examiner's report said your pausing in response to the honorific exercise was longer than protocol required. I assume you were reading the space between the words rather than retrieving the correct form. You were correct to pause. She read the 4 lines 5 times and then wrote back, I was reading the space. It said more. The reply came in 6 hours, which was fast for a fleet commander with 47 documented battles and 2 fleets worth of paperwork. Yes, that is the correct reading. She filed this exchange in the same mental folder as the reservoir, as the morning of Myra 7. As the things that were not courage exactly, but were the other thing. The other thing, she was learning, had a long history in Keth culture that the xenodiplomacy briefing materials had not adequately covered. The Velthari concept appeared in Keth literature going back 800 standard years. In their war epics, their philosophical texts, their recorded histories of battles that had turned on single individuals who simply would not stop when stopping was the rational choice. She found a supplemental text in the Bureau's extended xenolinguistic library, a Keth historical analysis of Velthari documented cases, and read it over 3 evenings. What she found was not what she had expected. The Velthari beings documented in Keth history were not heroes in the human sense of the word, not the loudest or the strongest or the ones who delivered speeches. They were often quiet. They were usually unremarkable in general terms. What distinguished them was precisely what the notation said. They did not stop, not when confronted with a wall, not when told by every available metric that the situation was resolved against them. They found the gap in the wall, or they went around it, or, on several notable occasions, they sat down in front of it and waited with such committed patience that the wall eventually reconsidered its position. In one historical account, a Keth battle 300 years past, cited frequently in the philosophical texts, a Velthari designation had been awarded posthumously to a being who had been the last one standing in a garrison that had been reduced, over 6 days, from 43 personnel to 1. Who had continued operating the garrison's communication relay on the final day with 2 injuries and no functional weapons, patching through contact messages for Allied forces until the reinforcement arrived, who had not, according to the record, considered any other course of action. Danny read that account twice. Then she put the tablet down and looked out the viewport at Myra 7's copper haze sky for a while. She thought, I am not that. I sat in front of a comms console for 20 minutes with 3 warships overhead, and then made 2 phone calls. She thought, but I also didn't stop. She thought, maybe that's the thing. Maybe it's not about scale. Maybe the designation doesn't care about scale. Maybe the wall is the wall, whether it's 3 warships or a reservoir or a word in the wrong language at the wrong moment, and the Velthari thing is just the nature that keeps moving regardless. She thought about what it meant that Vorkith Al-Shuran, who had been in 47 battles, who had stood in front of walls that made Danny's walls look like furniture, had looked at 20 minutes of channel management and said, this is the quality I recognize. She put the tablet away and went back to her certification study and didn't answer that question for herself, because some questions were better held than answered, and the Velthari thing didn't require her to understand it. It just required her to keep going. She kept going. As the morning of Myra 7, as the things that were not courage exactly, but were the other thing, the quality of staying present to what was actually happening rather than retreating into what you expected or feared. The Velthari thing, even before she had a name for it. The world reducing to the problem in front of you and the problem being solvable and moving. The reassignment orders arrived 4 months after the certification. Sergeant Holt, fully recovered and reading the transfer paperwork with his expression for official documents that had fingerprints on them, said only, the bureaus involved. Those orders went somewhere unusual before they came here. Sir, Danny said. Unusual, he repeated, and signed the paperwork and didn't say anything else. She arrived at Corridor Station 12 with a new corporal's bar on her collar and the xenolinguistic certification, and 6 months of thinking about pauses. She was processed, assessed, assigned. She passed the oral Keth assessment and kept going until the assessment officer raised a hand and said, with the specific Keth honorific that indicated mild approval, your certification is verified. She did not see Vorkith Al-Shuran on day 1 or day 2. On the 3rd day, at the end of a briefing on ion traffic patterns, she turned from rolling up her charts to find the commander in the doorway. In person, Vorkith Al-Shuran carried the same presence the screen had communicated but differently, the way a mountain in person is different from a photograph of one, even when the photograph is accurate in every detail. The dark battle armor, the amber pulsing lines, the scar from temple to mandible, those cold star eyes with their methodical gaze. All of it exactly as rendered on screen. The weight of it different. Private, the commander said. Corporal, Danny said, and immediately felt briefly ridiculous about it. The bioluminescent lines flickered yellow-gold, quick and percussive. Amusement. Corporal Rays, Vorkith said. You corrected me. You were incorrect, Commander. I was, a pause the deliberate kind, Vorkith Allah. Danny looked at her. Vorkith Allah, Commander. And then, because 12 weeks and 6 months and 1 message and 1 reply and 4 months of thinking about pauses had given her standing to try, Vel Keth Solari. The amber lines went yellow-gold slowly, fully, all the way from jaw to temple. Not the percussive flicker of amusement. The sustained, unhurried pulse that the briefing materials called recognition, the acknowledgement of something real and ongoing. It ran warm and steady through the amber, changing the quality of the light in the doorway. Your pronunciation has improved, the commander said. I had good material to study from, Danny said. The commander stood in the doorway, and Danny stood by her charts, and the station's corridor was quiet behind the commander's shoulder, and the amber light ran gold, and neither of them said anything for a moment because some moments were complete without words. The corridor mapping survey requires an additional liaison this cycle, Vorkith said. 8 weeks, 4 administrative sectors, 2 restricted military zones, significant xenolinguistic demand. I'm certified, Danny said. I am aware, a deliberate pause. I am offering you the posting. Danny thought about 11 months, about a wrong word and the next word after it, about the quality of moving forward because stopping doesn't occur to you as a real option. About the Velthari thing, which she understood now not as a description of heroism, but as a description of nature. The same way some trees grow toward light regardless of obstruction, not bravely, just by nature, because that is the direction growth goes. Velketh Solari, she said. The bioluminescent lines pulsed slow gold. Yes, Vorketh said, that. The survey took 9 weeks, not 8. The third sector's anomalous ion readings required a second pass, and the second pass found something that nobody had catalogued, which made it both a scientific discovery and a bureaucratic complication, which was the kind of thing that looked important in a formal report and was entirely routine from inside it. Most of the things that looked remarkable from outside were ordinary from within. Danny spent those 9 weeks in a survey craft with 6 Keth officers, 3 Bureau xenodiplomats who were professionally outclassed by week 3 and responded with the grace of people who had decided to be useful in the ways they could, and a fleet commander who worked 12-hour shifts at the station beside her and offered no explanation for it. None was needed. Some things communicated in the choosing rather than the saying. She stopped needing the reference files by week 3. The Keth second language, the bioluminescent lines, the weight of specific pauses, the texture of the spaces between words, had become readable in the way that a language becomes readable when you have stopped translating and started thinking in it. She knew when the amber meant patience, and when it meant something underneath patience that was more like care. She knew the difference between the quick yellow gold of amusement and the slow yellow gold of recognition. She knew that red came from concern more often than anger, which was different from what the briefing materials had said, because the briefing materials had been written by people who had not spent 9 weeks in a survey craft with someone whose bioluminescent lines they had been reading carefully for 216 hours. She learned that the scar from the Second Battle of Velshari was not a story Vorketh told, and that the commander noticed when Danny didn't ask about it, and that noticing she didn't ask produced a specific slow gold pulse that happened once and then settled into the kind of warmth that didn't need acknowledging, because acknowledging it would have been smaller than just holding it. She learned that the commander found the same things funny she did, the gap between protocol and reality, the small structural absurdities of very different beings trying to organize themselves in shared space, the moments when bureaucratic procedure collided with actual circumstances, and the actual circumstances won. She learned that this quality, the finding it funny quality, was Velthari adjacent, something that came from the same source. The ability to look at the wall and see it clearly without letting it be the most important thing in the room. She learned in the 4th week that the 6 Keth officers on the survey craft had their own opinion about the situation that nobody had officially documented, but that was present in the specific quality of their attention whenever Danny and the commander were working together at adjacent stations. It was not unfriendly. It was not disapproving. It was the attention that experienced beings paid to something that was still developing, careful, interested, slightly amused, the way you might watch a rare weather formation from a distance because the alternative was standing inside it, and that was the commander's prerogative, not theirs. One of them, a junior logistics officer named Velshar Keth, who had 12 years of corridor service, and the specific good humor of someone who had been in long enough to find everything professional slightly absurd, handed Danny a small Keth data disk in the 3rd week, and said, in standard, with the careful articulation that meant he was choosing the language deliberately, for your reference files, the section on sustained yellow gold. She looked at him. He was already walking away. She read the disk that night. The sustained yellow gold section, which she had already been reading about for weeks, was preceded in this text, a historical personal account, not an official record, by a passage that she translated slowly and carefully, and then translated again because she wanted to be sure she had it right. It said, "The bioluminescent lines are not ornament and they are not performance. They are the body's honest account of the interior. You cannot control what runs through the lines the way you can control what runs through the voice. A Keth who has learned to manage their voice is not managing their lines. This is why the lines are read before the words, among those who know how to read. The words tell you what the being wants you to know. The lines tell you what the being is." She read it 3 times. She thought about 6 months of messages on the encrypted channel, about the cold star eyes that were warmer at the edges in yellow gold light, about the sustained pulse that ran slow and full through the amber when she'd said Vel Keth Solari in the doorway of the briefing room. She returned the disc to Velshar Keth the next morning and said, "In Keth, thank you for the reference material." He said in Keth, with the specific honorific that meant I am speaking plainly and without rank consideration. "You were already reading it. I just gave you the words." She thought about that for the rest of the week. On the 53rd night of the survey, when the anomalous readings had resolved and the third sector data was clean and the craft was quiet in the dark between sectors, Vorkith sat down beside her at the logging station and said, in Keth, quietly, "You know what it means. The full meaning of Velthari." And Danny said in Keth, "Yes." And neither of them said anything after that for a long time, because the dark between stars was very complete, and the station was very quiet, and some spaces were as meaningful as the words they held. She wrote the survey report in both registers, standard for the Bureau, Keth formal for the corridor administration, because she had started thinking in both, and it was easier to write it that way than to translate back. In the supplemental comments field, she wrote, "The Keth concept of Velthari resists clean translation into standard. It is not courage. Courage is a choice made in spite of fear, the performance of unafraid, undertaken by beings who feel afraid and choose to act anyway. Velthari is different in kind. It is the quality in a being for whom stopping in the presence of a problem does not register as a choice. The wall appears. The Velthari being notes the wall. They look for what is on the other side. Not because they are fearless, but because the wall is information, not an ending." I did not understand this when the commander first used the notation. I thought it was a compliment. I now understand it as a description, the way you might describe a physical characteristic of a material. Not a judgment of worth, but an observation of nature. In 11 months of service and 9 weeks of survey duty across the Keth corridor, I have encountered walls of various sizes and compositions. Some had names. Some had the Vor sigil on their armor. Some were in languages I did not yet know how to read. In every case, the correct response was the same one I gave the first time, before I knew the word for it or understood that anyone was watching. I kept moving. I kept talking. I paid attention to what was not being said as much as what was. I treated the space between words the same way I treated the words themselves. The galaxy is mostly made of walls. The walls contain information. I recommend moving through them. She signed it Corporal Daniela Reyes, 9th Expeditionary Battalion, United Earth Defense Forces. In the co-signatory line, in the hand of the fleet commander who had given her the survey posting, and sat beside her for 9 weeks and taught her, without once using the word teach, that Velthari was not something you could perform but something you were. Velketh Solari. Between those who have shared a difficult journey and wish to continue walking. The station's corridor was amber-lit and quiet. Somewhere outside the hull, the ion storm had finally, fully passed, and the Keth corridor was very clear, and Danny Reyes walked forward into it, because stopping had not occurred to her, and it still didn't, and she thought it probably never would. She thought about the reservoir at 14. About the way the world narrowed to just the problem when everything else fell away. About how her mother had said you were supposed to be scared, as though the not stopping was a failure of the normal machinery rather than a different machine running correctly. She thought about Alanax, the one I would not survive without, the one who is my anchor in chaos. She had used it wrong. She had retrieved it from the wrong file, under pressure, 11 months into her service, with 3 warships overhead and no senior officer available. And it had been the wrong word in every technical sense and the beginning of something in every other sense. And she had no more adequate word for that than cooperative in resolution. And she thought some things didn't need words either, the same way some spaces were complete without them. The corridor light ran amber gold. The stars of the Keth corridor ran clear beyond the viewport. Danny Reyes walked forward, because that was what she did, because that was what she was, because the universe had been offering her walls since she was 14 years old, and she had never once found a reason to stop at them. She thought it was possible she never would. Behind her, in the survey craft's main corridor, she could hear the organized sounds of the craft preparing for the transit back to Corridor Station 12. The Keth officers running their pre-transit checks in the precise, methodical way of beings who had been in space long enough to trust procedure the way humans trusted instinct. She could hear Velshar Keth's voice in the logistics rundown, unhurried, accurate. She could hear the soft hum of the transit drive cycling to readiness. She could hear closer, the specific quality of silence that meant the commander was nearby but not intruding. The particular weighted stillness that she had learned, over 9 weeks, to distinguish from ordinary absence the way you learn to distinguish a specific instrument in an orchestra once you had heard it clearly enough times. She looked up. Vorketh Alshuran was standing at the viewport at the corridor's end, not facing it, facing Danny from the distance of 30 feet, with the Cold Star eyes running warm in the survey craft's amber overhead light and the bioluminescent lines in their slow, sustained gold. Neither of them said anything. That was the thing about Velketh Solari, the thing that the xenolinguistic files captured accurately, but the briefing materials had not, because the briefing materials were about the mechanics of address, and not about what it felt like to inhabit one. The address between those who have shared a difficult journey and wish to continue walking didn't require speech to be true. It was true in the choosing. It was true in the 30 feet of quiet corridor and the amber light, and the survey that had found something new in the 3rd sector, and the 9 weeks of adjacent stations, and the disc from Velshar Keth, and the message in the header that carried the Vor sigil and the wrong word at the beginning of everything that had turned out, as wrong words sometimes did, to be pointing at the right thing from an unexpected direction. Danny thought about the reservoir one more time, about her mother. You were supposed to be scared. She thought I was scared. I was scared the whole time. The fear was there, it just didn't stop me. It never stopped me. Maybe that was the Velthari thing. Maybe the Velthari thing was not the absence of fear, but the presence of something stronger, not braver, just more stubborn, more committed to the problem than to the protection of itself from the problem. She thought I called her Alanax. She thought the word will not be held against you. It was not entirely inaccurate. The amber lines ran slow gold, 30 feet away, patient and unhurried and very present, and Danny Reyes stood in the corridor with her survey reports finished, and her certification on record and 11 months of service behind her that had turned into something she did not have a form to file, and did not need one, because some things were true without documentation, the same way some gaps were crossed without knowing exactly when the crossing happened, and the Velketh Solari thing was ongoing. And both of them knew it, and neither of them was stopping. The transit drive hummed. The stars waited. She walked down the corridor toward the commander because that was what she did, and she said in Keth, with the pronunciation she had earned, Vorketh Solari. And Ev Alshuran said, in standard, quietly, with the precise articulation of someone choosing the language deliberately, yes, that. and they walked together toward the transit, because the journey was ongoing, and neither of them had ever found a wall they intended to stop at, and the corridor stretched ahead of them into whatever came next, and the light was amber gold, and they moved into it together, and did not stop.